How are you guys doing? Today is Sunday, June 27th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual profile on Bobby Wagner, the elite middle linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks, turns 31 today. So with this episode of The Elite, I plan on going through his accolades, his accomplishments, his achievements to give context and understanding as to why he is listed as one of the elite athletes of all athletes to play sports for the 2021 year, at least within the four sports that I did this for. If you're unfamiliar with him, he's probably one of the best middle linebackers you've seen. When Luke Kuechly was playing, it was the competition was between him and Luke Kuechly, and even a little bit of Patrick Willis in there when Bobby Wagner was just getting started. And he's been a very integral piece and one of the reasons why the Seattle Seahawks defense was as powerful as it was at the height of its powers. But if you're not familiar with Bobby Wagner, to give a little bit of background, he's originally from LA. He would eventually go on to play at Utah State, and at Utah State, he would go on to play 4 years. In his sophomore, junior, and senior year, he will go on to finish with triple-digit tackles as he would establish himself as a good enough prospect out of Utah State to be taken with the 47th overall pick in the NFL draft, which is the 15th pick in the second round. He was taken to the Seattle Seahawks. And coming into this season, the Seattle Seahawks did not make the playoffs, but they made it in 2010. But going into their very first season with Bobby Wagner, in his age 22 season in 2012, Bobby Wagner would come in as an immediate starter. He would start 15 of 16 games in his very first season, in a year where the Seattle Seahawks would go all the way to the playoffs. They would finish with the second best record in the NFC West, and in this season itself, Bobby Wagner would finish with 140 total tackles in those 16 games. He also finished with 3 interceptions, which is the most interceptions he's ever posted up in an entire season. And he would also post up 9 tackles for loss. Following this season, the Seattle Seahawks would go on to beat the Redskins in the first round, and they would lose to the Falcons in the divisional round. And then this would go on to be the year that the Baltimore Ravens would beat the San Francisco 49ers. But in his very first year, Bobby Wagner was able to show his worth as an instant impact player for one of the best young teams in football. And this is all in Pete Carroll's third season with the team. In Bobby Wagner's second season with Seattle in 2013, his age 23 season, he would start all 14 of the games that he played in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would finish with the best record in the NFC West. They finished with a 13-3 record, winning 2 more games than the previous year. In this season, Bobby Wagner would finish with 120 total tackles, 20 less than the previous year. He finished with 5 sacks, which is the most sacks he's ever finished within an entire season. He finished with a couple of picks as well and 7 passes defended. He would not make Pro Bowl honors that year, but he would still go on to be recognized as one of the best linebackers in football, or he was at least one of the most important pieces to one of the most lethal defenses in all of football. Once they made the playoffs, the Seattle Seahawks would beat the Saints by 8 in the divisional round. They would beat Kaepernick and the 49ers in the NFC Championship by 6, and they would go on to beat the Denver Broncos 43-8 in what was Super Bowl 48, which was a very big win, and this would be Seattle's only Super Bowl win in their franchise history. Malcolm Smith, one of the other linebackers, would be named the Super Bowl MVP. But of course, following his second season in the league before being named a Pro Bowler, he was one of the best players on a Super Bowl winning team, and he was a Super Bowl champion himself. Going into his third season with Seattle, his age 24 season, he would start all 11 of the games that he would play in a season which would be plagued by injury a little bit, but it would be a season in which the Seattle Seahawks finished with a 12-4 record, 1 win less than the previous year, and they would make the playoffs. He would go on to be named a Pro Bowler, and he would go on to be named first team All-Pro for the very first time in his NFL career. In his third season in football as a middle linebacker, which is a very important position to do so in, he would finish with 104 combined tackles. He finished with 10 tackles for loss, which is the most tackles for loss he'd have at that point in his career, along with 2 sacks. And after making the Pro Bowl for the very first time and making the first team All-Pro, once they made the playoffs, they would beat the Panthers in the divisional round by 2 touchdowns. They beat the Packers by 6 in overtime, and they would lose to the Patriots in Super Bowl 49. So in Super Bowl 49, just for a little bit more context. And this would be the year where where Malcolm Butler intercepted the ball on the goal line, and they were that close to winning back-to-back. But Bobby Wagner was still a very important part of that team. Following their Super Bowl loss, the Bobby Wagner has not made it to the Super Bowl since. But regardless, going into his 4th season into Seattle, his age 25 season, he would start all 15 games in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would go right back to the playoffs for the 4th year in a row with a 10-6 record. They won 2 less games in the previous season, but Bobby Wagner would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for his second straight season for the second straight time in his first 4 seasons in the league. And he would also go on to be named a second team All-Pro for the only time in his career. That is the only time in his career he's been named second team All-Pro. In that season, he would go on to finish with 114 combined tackles, 10 more than the previous season. He finished with 3 fumble recoveries for 2 fumble recovery touchdowns, the only time in his career he finished with more than 1 defensive touchdown in a season. Or at least he finished with more than one. Yeah, he finished with more than 1 defensive touchdown in a season, at least from scrimmage. And following that second season, he would come back to Seattle for his 5th season in his age 26 season in 2016. He would start all 16 games for the very first time in his career in season 5, in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would finish with a 10-5-1 record, with the best record in the NFC West. This would be the 5th consecutive year in which they would make the playoffs. Bobby Wagner would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the 3rd time in a row, and he would be named a second team All-Pro for the 2nd time in his first 5 seasons in the league. He would finish with 167 combined tackles, which led football. This is the first time in his career he led the league in tackles. He would go on to finish with an interception as well. And once they made the playoffs, they would go on to lose. They would beat the Lions on the wild card, and they would lose to the Falcons in the divisional round. This would be the year that the Falcons would make it to the Super Bowl and lose to the Patriots after blowing a 28-3 lead. Following this 2016 season, Bobby Wagner would come back to Seattle for his 6th season in 2017, his age 27 season. In this season, he would start all 16 games for the 2nd year in a row, in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would finish with a 9-7 record, and they would miss the playoffs for the first time since 2011. So the very first time in Bobby Wagner's career, because the last time they missed it was the year before they drafted him. In 2017, in the 16 games he started, he would finish with 130 combined tackles. He led the league in solo tackles for the only time in his career. He finished with a safety as well. He had 2 picks, two fumble recoveries, and one of them being for a touchdown as well. He was definitely all over the place. He was named a Pro Bowler for the 4th season in a row, and especially just a big honor at middle linebacker in his first 6 seasons in the league. And he was named a first-team All-Pro for the 3rd time in his first 6 seasons. To be able to do it in half of your seasons at that point and be a Super Bowl champ is a feat among itself. And following his age 27 season, he would come back to Seattle for his 7th season, his age 28 season in 2018. In that year, he would start all 15 of the games he would play in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would finish with a 10-6 record. They would finish with the 2nd best record in the NFC West after winning 1 more game than the previous season. That would be the 6th time he made the playoffs in his first 7 seasons in the league. In that specific season, Bobby Wagner would finish with 138 total tackles on the year, which of course very good for numbers especially for him. That would be the 3rd highest amount of tackles he'd ever put up in a season, especially in his first 7 years. He would get one interception for 98 yards for a pick six. He would force a couple of fumbles as well. And at the end of the season, he would be named a Pro Bowler for the fifth year in a row, and especially in his first 5 seasons. And he would be named to the first team All Pro as a linebacker for the fourth time in a 5-year stretch. And the other year in which he wasn't first team, he was second team All Pro. Once the Seattle Seahawks made the playoffs, they would end up losing to the Cowboys in the wild card round. This is the year where the Patriots would beat the Rams, for context. But following that season, Wagner would come back to 2019 for his 8th consecutive season with the Seattle Seahawks. In that season, he would start all 16 of the games that he would play in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would finish with an 11-5 record, the second best record in the NFC West, as they would make the playoffs for the second year in a row, and the 7th time in the 8 years that Bobby Wagner had been there. In those games, he would finish with 159 combined tackles. That would be the second time he has led the NFL in tackles, and that's the most recent time that's the last time he has done it, at least to date at this moment. He finished with an interception on the season. He also forced a fumble and recovered a fumble as well. He would be named a Pro Bowler for the 6th consecutive season, and he would be named to the All-NFL, All-Pro first team for the 5th time in 6 seasons, which is an unheard of feat to do, especially as a linebacker. He's entering like Ray Lewis, Luke Kuechly territory. Following this season, once they made the playoffs, the Seahawks would beat the Eagles in the first round 17-9, and they would lose to the Packers in the divisional round, and this would be the year that the Chiefs would end up beating the 49ers. They would come from behind and pick up their first championship. And following that, this would lead us into this most recent 2020 season. Of course, the season that was impacted by COVID. That would not allow fans to be sitting in the stadium, but it still was able to get from the beginning to the very end. And in this 2020 season, in Bobby Wagner's most recent season, his 9th season with the Seattle Seahawks, he would go on to start all 16 games in a season where the Seattle Seahawks finished with a 12-4 record. That is they finished with the best record in the NFC West, their first NFC West title since 2016. That is the 3rd consecutive year they've made the playoffs, and that is the 9th year that they've made, or the 8th year that they've made the playoffs in Bobby Wagner's 9 years there. In those 16 games, he would finish with 138 combined tackles, 20 less than the year before, but still doing what he was doing. He finished with 3 tackles, or 3 sacks, as what he was doing as well. He had 7 tackles for loss. He was able to defend 8 passes and recover a fumble as well. At the conclusion of the season, he was named a Pro Bowler for the 7th consecutive season, which at linebacker just shows, which is just a feat of consistency. He would be named to the first team All-Pro for the 5th consecutive year and for the 6th time in that 7-year stretch. And after this season, the Seattle Seahawks would go on to lose to the Rams in the very first wild card game. And this most recent season, the Buccaneers would win the Super Bowl. But looking at where Bobby Wagner currently is as an athlete right now, he is currently turning 31 today. He is a Super Bowl champ. He is a 7-time Pro Bowler. He made the first team All-Pro 6 times. He made the second team All-Pro once, proving that he is a top player at his position, if not a top 5 player at his position, for the last 7 seasons. And at middle linebacker, one of the most important position on the defensive side of the field, that speaks for itself. He's led the NFL in tackles twice. He was named to the 2010s All-Decade team. Not to mention, this dude was 3-time first-team All-WAC when he was playing in college. This dude, from the second he's been in the limelight, has been one of the best players. And I don't think he's slowing down any time. And I think that with time, he can possibly put out more first team All-Pro seasons, because this is an active streak. But with that said, I want to thank ESPN. I want to thank Football Reference. I want to thank Wikipedia for all of the facts and numbers and figures that I needed in order to do this episode. And I want to thank everyone for listening to all 14 and a half minutes of this piece. I hope all is well. I want to wish Bobby Wagner a happy 31st birthday. If you ever get a chance to watch him, he wears number 54 for the Seattle Seahawks on the same team as Russell Wilson. And like I said, if between now and his 32nd birthday, hopefully he can add more and give me more of a reason to add him to this list next season. With that said, thanks once again for listening to this piece. I hope all is well. Today is Sunday, June 27, 2021. This is The Elite. Thanks for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and peace out. I will catch you with more episodes of The Elite tomorrow.